Most gardeners dream of fruit trees without noticing the real productivity champions at their feet. Plants that can outcompete the garden in speed and fertility are often placed in containers and narrow beds. While one gardener waits for years for the tree to ripen, another is already collecting kilograms of harvest from the veranda. Some of these plants bear fruit in the first season, then reproduce themselves for the rest of the year. One of them turns a single rosette into a chain of daughter plants without even moving a shovel. Another climbs to a height of 2 meters and bears fruit for months if the crop is harvested without stopping. Several of the best producers have disappeared from American gardens due to regulations, neglect, or supermarkets. Some are so productive that experienced gardeners rarely brag because the numbers sound incredible. By the end of this list, viewers will understand why garden thinking often slows down food security. The list begins with a plant so familiar that almost no one sees it as a smart food machine. Let's start with strawberries, because no plant on this list makes a stronger first impression when you realize what it actually does. A single strawberry bush produces about 1.5 kilograms of berries per season. But that's not the most impressive part. What happens after the harvest is impressive. Strawberries send out tendrils, long horizontal stems that take root in the soil and automatically become brand new plants without your intervention. One plant becomes 5, 5 becomes 25, 25 becomes 100. A strawberry patch doesn't just produce berries, it produces berries and new producers at the same time. Compare this to a fruit tree that you plant and wait 3 years, 5 years, sometimes longer for a significant harvest. Meanwhile, your strawberries bear fruit months after planting and silently build an army of new plants as they fruit. The variety matters. June varieties produce one huge burst of berries in early summer, which is great for canning. Remontant varieties produce smaller waves of harvest throughout the season, which is better for constant fresh consumption. Strawberries have been underrated as serious food producers because they are too familiar. We think of it as a nice garden treat rather than a food security plant. But when you count the numbers, 1.5 kilograms per bush, automatic propagation, fruits in the first year. Strawberries are not a garden decoration. She is one of the most efficient food machines in the plant kingdom, paying you and then sending her children to pay you again. Here is a plant that has figured out what most gardeners don't: grow up, not out. Raspberries produce fruit on tall, upright shoots, which means they can be packed into tight rows, trellised and harvested hugely from narrow strips of ground. A well-established raspberry plantation produces heavy harvests for years with very little input once established. The biology is elegant. Raspberries produce 2 types of shoots: annual primocanes, which grow in the first year, and biennial floricarnus, which bear fruit in the second year. If you understand this cycle, you can manage your plantation for continuous production, cutting out fruit-bearing shoots after harvest, while next year's shoots are already growing behind them. Summer and fall varieties offer flexibility. Some gardeners grow both types to extend the harvest window from midsummer until frost. What makes raspberries special compared to fruit trees is not only the yield, but the speed of rooting. Plant bare-rooted seedlings in the spring, and within 18 months you will be able to harvest significant quantities of berries. No fruit tree on earth comes close to this timeline. Raspberries have been underestimated because the shoots are thorny and management seems difficult at first glance. But once you understand the 2-year escape cycle, management becomes simple. This is a plant that rewards people who spend 10 minutes understanding its thinking. If raspberries are the polished, well-mannered member of the caneberry family, then blackberries are the ones that pop up and take over the neighborhood. Blackberries are almost aggressively productive. 1 to 1.5 kilograms per plant annually is a conservative estimate. In good conditions with rooted plants, you can get much more. It takes root wherever the tips of the shoots touch the ground. It grows in poor soils, does not require constant attention, and bears fruit heavily even in partial shade, where most food plants struggle to survive. Modern thornless varieties have eliminated the main objection that most people had to growing it. Varieties like Triple Crown and Chester produce huge, sweet berries on shoots that won't tear your hands apart at harvest. That's what makes blackberries a true food security plant. They ask almost nothing of you and give a huge return. No spraying, no complicated pruning schedules, no expensive additives. Sit her down, give her something for support, and don't disturb her. Blackberries have been avoided in home gardens because wild blackberries are a weed, and people associate the plant with this invasive reputation. But managed thornless varieties with limited root systems are a completely different proposition. This is a plant that was unfairly judged for the behavior of its wild cousin. Blueberries require the most patience of anything on this list. But what you get when patience pays off is exceptional. A mature blueberry bush, and we're talking about 5 to 7 years before true maturity, can produce 4 to 9 kilograms of berries per year from a bush about 20 meters high and a meter wide. Do the math against an apple tree that can produce 18 to 27 kilograms, but requires a crown radius of 3 meters, and blueberries start to look extremely efficient per square meter. The catch is in the soil. Blueberries require acidic conditions, a pH of 4.5 to 5.5, which most garden soils do not naturally provide. You either amend the soil with sulfur over time or grow in raised beds or containers with an acidic mixture of peat and perlite. This is where most people give up on blueberries, but those who solve the soil problem are rewarded with decades of harvest. Plant at least 2 varieties for cross-pollination. Early, mid, and late varieties extend the harvest window into 6 to 8 weeks of summer. Blueberries have been overlooked by many gardeners because the establishment phase is slow and their soil requirements seem finicky. But gardeners, realizing that they were planting a 20-year investment rather than a quick crop, built blueberry plantations that now feed their families every summer almost on autopilot. This is a plant that teaches the difference between patience and wasting time. Now we come to plants that American gardeners have almost completely forgotten, and this is a real tragedy. Currants, both red and black, are among the most productive small fruit shrubs in nature. It bears fruit abundantly several years after planting and tolerates partial shade better than almost any other fruit-bearing plant. It is disease-resistant, requires little maintenance, and can be planted as a dense, productive hedge that both produces food and provides structure in the garden. Black currants in particular are a food powerhouse. Their vitamin C content is exceptionally high, significantly higher than oranges. The flavor is intense, complex, and unlike anything you can find in the grocery store. A single established currant bush can produce 2 to 4.5 kilograms of berries annually from a footprint smaller than most patio chairs. Currants were legally banned in many American states in the early 1900s because they were believed to spread a disease that affected white pine trees. Most of these bans have since been lifted, but the cultural memory of currants as a food plant has largely disappeared from American gardening. An entire generation grew up not knowing that this exceptional plant existed. This is the fruit that Prohibition stole from American gardens, and most people don't even know they should be angry. Gooseberries are the equally forgotten cousins of currants, and they deserve exactly the same rehabilitation. Compact gooseberry bushes pack a surprising amount of berries onto their branches. The berries hang in clusters along each stem, and at the peak of production, the entire bush looks as if it has been decorated for some kind of harvest festival. A well-grown gooseberry bush produces between 2 and 4.5 kilograms annually. The taste of a perfectly ripe gooseberry, warm from the sun, soft, bursting with a balance of sweet and sour, is something most people in this country have simply never experienced. European gardeners always knew what they had. American gardeners have largely forgotten. Gooseberries tolerate heavy clay soils and partial shade better than most fruit-bearing plants, are cold-resistant, and are not particularly prone to pests. It produces reliably year after year with minimal intervention. What pushed gooseberries out of the American consciousness was the same white pine rust scare that plagued currants, combined with the post-war shift to supermarket culture. There, the only fruits worth growing were those that could be commercially packaged and shipped. Gooseberries do not travel well. They are a garden fruit intended to be consumed where they are grown. This is not weakness. It is an invitation. It's a fruit that supermarkets couldn't figure out how to exploit, so they just pretended it didn't exist. Honeysuckle solves a problem that you may not have realized was a problem. What do you collect when everything else is still weeks away from being ready? Hascap berries ripen earlier than strawberries, earlier than cherries, sometimes earlier than any other fresh fruit in the garden. If you've ever stood in your garden at the end of May craving something fresh and homegrown, honeysuckle is the answer. The bushes are cold hardy to an extent that is almost hard to believe. Some varieties tolerate temperatures well below -40 degrees. They thrive in climates where other berries struggle to survive. The fruit itself is oblong, deep blue-violet, with a flavor reminiscent of a cross between blueberry and raspberry, with a hint of something almost floral. Plant 2 or more varieties for cross-pollination, and your honeysuckle bushes will reward you for decades. The bushes are long-lived, low-maintenance, and once established are reliably productive year after year. Honeysuckle is virtually unknown in mainstream American horticulture because it is a relatively recent introduction from breeding programs working with wild Siberian and Japanese varieties. The commercial infrastructure has not kept up with how good these plants really are. Early adopters in northern climates who got in early are now sitting on some of the most productive early-season small fruit plantings in their regions. This is a plant that will be everywhere in 10 years, and you can have it now. Lingonberries are tiny. The bushes are tiny, often only 15 to 30 centimeters tall. The berries are tiny. But pack lingonberries together in a ground cover planting, and the production per square meter becomes remarkable. These small evergreen shrubs from Scandinavian and subarctic ecosystems produce heavy clusters of bright red berries in late summer and often again in autumn. They are cold hardy to extreme temperatures, retain leaves through winter, and thrive in acidic soils similar to blueberries. They spread slowly through underground shoots, filling any space you give them. If you've eaten Swedish meatballs with that signature sour red sauce at IKEA, you've tasted Lingonberries. In Scandinavia, Lingonberry jam for cooking is the same as ketchup in America. Ubiquitous, loved, and considered necessary. But almost no one grows them in American gardens. The flavor is sharper and more complex than cranberries, with an acidity that pairs brilliantly with savory dishes, game, and rich cheeses. The nutritional profile is excellent, and once established, the Lingonberry ground cover practically takes care of itself. Lingonberries were overlooked in American food culture simply because there was no commercial infrastructure to introduce them. They are not shipped or stored like cranberries. They are a garden crop intended for the people who grow them. This means that the people who grow them have something truly special that most of their neighbors don't have. Here's a plant that the health food industry discovered and now charges a fortune for powders and supplements. And it can already grow as an ornamental in your area without anyone suspecting that it is edible. Chokeberry berries grow in massive, heavy clusters that bend the branches of the bush under their weight at the peak of ripeness. The yield from the plant is exceptional. A mature chokeberry bush can produce from 7 to 14 kilograms of berries annually. The shrubs are native to North America, are cold hardy, disease-resistant, drought-tolerant once established, and require little maintenance. The flavor is intensely astringent when fresh. The chokeberry name is fair, but cooked, squeezed, or dried chokeberry becomes something exceptional. Anthocyanin content is among the highest of all berries, which is why it has become a superfood supplement. Dear people paying $30 for chokeberry powder could just grow 3 bushes. Chokeberry grows in difficult conditions where other fruits fail. Wet soils, heavy clay, partial shade, chokeberry copes with it all. Planted as a hedge, windbreak, slope stabilizer, and harvest massive amounts of one of the most antioxidant-rich foods in the plant kingdom from a plant that practically grows itself. Chokeberries were ignored as food because they were planted as ornamentals, valued for their brilliant red fall foliage. And no one bothered to tell American gardeners that the berries hanging on those magnificent bushes were edible and extremely nutritious. It's a plant hiding in plain sight in suburban landscaping projects everywhere. We've talked about Seabuckthorn before in a different context as a medicinal plant. But as a food producer, compact varieties of Seabuckthorn are exceptional. The berries grow so tightly packed along the stems that picking them is like picking beads from a string. The harvest from the bush in a good fruit year is wonderful. The branches literally bend under the weight. The berries are intensely sour, extremely rich in vitamins and omega fatty acids, and have an absolutely brilliant orange color. The juice is used throughout Russia and Central Asia as a daily health tonic. The oil is used in high-end skincare. The berries can be squeezed, made into syrups, added to smoothies, or processed into canned food. 1 teaspoon of Seabuckthorn juice contains more vitamin C than several oranges. Compact varieties suitable for garden planting are now available and are much more manageable than large, spreading bushes of wild plants. Plant a male and a female plant for pollination. One male can pollinate several females, and you'll be harvesting exceptional quantities of some of the most nutritionally dense food available from a relatively compact planting. Seabuckthorn has been overlooked in American food culture for the same reason it has been overlooked in medicine. It grows wild in harsh, remote climates, and the commercial infrastructure to make it available simply did not exist until recently. People who realize this early quietly recycle buckets of orange gold every fall from plants that most neighbors walk past without looking twice. This is where the list shifts into another gear. Vegetables that produce with a relentlessness that bushes and trees simply cannot match. Climbing beans are one of the most effective food plants in existence, given a full season. It grows vertically on trellises, which means you're farming in airspace that would otherwise go unused. It fixes its own nitrogen from the atmosphere, which means it feeds the soil while it feeds you. And critically, it produces continuously. Harvest climbing beans and more beans will grow. Stop collecting and production slows. A plant's biological mission is to produce seeds, and as long as you continue to harvest until the seeds mature, it continues to produce. On a trellis 2 meters high and 2.5 meters wide, a row of climbing beans can supply a family with fresh beans several times a week for 3 to 4 months. The nutritional value is genuine. Beans provide protein, fiber, and significant nutrition in a way that most fruits do not. When thinking about plants that feed a family rather than just provide treats, beans belong at the center of the conversation. Climbing beans have been relegated to being a humble garden staple rather than the productivity miracle that they truly are. Gardeners who tend vertical trellises of climbing beans from June to October quietly harvest hundreds of dollars worth of produce from a few square meters of land. This is a protein factory that grows straight up and never stops until frost takes it. Peas solve a different problem than most vegetables on this list. It produces during the cool season, spring and fall, when most other food plants are either dormant or not yet producing. Trellising peas in April and May, when nothing else is ready, is worth more to a food gardener than almost anything else. The yield per square meter is high, the harvest window is constant, and the taste of fresh homegrown peas, sweet, crunchy, complex, is truly different from anything commercially available. Sugar snap peas in particular give you the whole pod, which increases your yield per planting. Shelling peas give you high protein, starchier peas that are good for cooking and storing. Snow peas provide you with tender pods for fresh eating and roasting. Each type has its own use. The limitation is heat. Peas stop producing and go to seed when summer comes. But plant it as soon as the ground can be tilled, trellis it upright, and harvest it aggressively to extend the window. And peas will give you weeks of heavy, continuous production during the hungry gap of late spring when most food gardens are still waiting to awaken. Peas have been underappreciated because they are viewed as a cool season crop with limited utility. But paired with fall plantings that take over when spring peas run out, it covers seasons that other crops miss. This is a plant that starts producing while your fruit trees are still in bloom. And here it is, the plant I teased at the beginning. One that produces hundreds of individual fruits from one plant in one season. Cherry tomatoes, pound for pound, calorie for calorie, dollar for dollar, are one of the highest yielding garden crops in existence. One vigorous, indeterminate cherry tomato plant properly staked, properly fed, and grown in full sun, can produce hundreds of tomatoes over the course of a season, several kilograms per week at peak production. Think about what this means. From one plant that occupies about half a square meter of soil, you can harvest fresh fruit from July until frost. Production is so relentless that most gardeners end up with more tomatoes than they know what to do with. Varieties like Sandgold, Black Cherry, and Sweet Million are close to legendary among food gardeners for a reason: a taste that food tomatoes don't come close to, a production that doesn't stop, and a sweetness that makes them disappear faster than you can pick them. The cultural requirements are significant: full sun, constant water, good fertility. But meet these requirements and the cherry tomato plant is the closest thing to a fruit tree that will grow in one season. Except that it produces in the first year from seed in 4 months. Cherry tomatoes have been considered a garden novelty when they are actually a serious food production tool. Anyone who has guided a 3-plant trellis of indeterminate cherry tomatoes through a full season knows what I'm talking about. It's a machine of hundreds of fruits that fits into a pot on your deck and outperforms most dwarf fruit trees in its first summer. Cucumbers on a trellis are a fundamentally different proposition from cucumbers creeping along the ground. Vertical trellis solves 3 problems at once: keeps the fruit clean and straight, maximizes air circulation to reduce disease, and allows you to grow huge quantities of cucumbers in a very small area. One trellis of 5 to 6 cucumber plants, 2 meters tall and 2 meters wide, can produce dozens of cucumbers a week during peak season. The key is exactly the same as what works with climbing beans: keep harvesting. The moment you allow a cucumber to develop to full maturity on the vine, the plant slows down. Harvest young, harvest often, and the plants continue to produce at a remarkable rate. A cucumber that was a small bud on Monday may be ready to pick by Thursday. Cucumbers are one of the most water-dense foods you can grow, which makes a difference. In the heat of summer, cucumbers fresh from the garden are cooling, hydrating, and virtually free once your plants are established. Cucumbers have been underrated as a food production plant because they are seasonal and do not keep well fresh. But during the height of summer, when production is at its peak, a trellised cucumber planting produces more food per square meter per week than almost anything else in the garden. This is the plant that makes you realize that a trellis isn't a garden accessory. It's a multiplier. Here is a plant that most gardeners in this country have never grown, and which deserves much more attention than it gets. Malabar spinach isn't actually spinach. It's a tropical vine that produces thick, glossy, edible leaves all summer in heat that kills real spinach. When your spring spinach has taken off and the summer heat has killed off your lettuce, Malabar spinach picks up its pace and climbs its trellis. The leaves are thick and slightly succulent with a mild flavor that works fresh in salads or cooked as you would with regular spinach. The vines can reach 2.5 to 3 meters per season, producing dense growth completely covered in edible leaves. One plant, properly maintained, can provide a family with fresh herbs throughout the hot summer season. The nutritional profile is strong, high in vitamins A and C, calcium, and iron. This is true production of nutritious food, not just volume. Malabar spinach was overlooked because it is a tropical plant that requires starting indoors in northern climates, and because most seed catalogs didn't carry it until recently. But the food gardeners who discovered it realized they had found the solution to the summer green gap, that frustrating period when spring crops are gone and fall crops aren't ready. This is the plant that continues to feed you when the summer heat has driven every other green from the garden. Kale's reputation as a trendy superfood vegetable obscures what it really is: one of the most productive, hardy, and long-season food plants available to the home gardener. A mature kale plant harvested correctly, taking the outer leaves and leaving the growing center, can produce for months. In mild climates, kale grows year-round. In colder climates, it often survives light frosts and can be harvested until hard frost in the fall, then again in early spring as it grows back from the root. A single planting of kale takes up a small space and provides constant greenery from early summer through winter. The nutritional density is exceptional. Kale is truly one of the most nutrient-dense foods that can be grown in temperate climates. Harvesting technique matters. Cut only the outer leaves, always leave the central growing point intact, and your kale plants will continue to generate new growth continuously. Treat kale like a one-time crop and miss out on much of what it has to offer. Kale was dismissed for years as livestock feed until its nutritional reputation was restored, then it was dismissed as an overrated trend. The truth is somewhat simpler. Kale is a remarkably productive, cold-hardy, repeatable plant that earns its place in the garden every season. This is a plant that refuses to quit even when the season tells it to. Nothing else in the garden comes close to lettuce in terms of return on investment. Multi-harvest leaf varieties, non-head lettuces, which are a one-time harvest, can be sown and produce harvestable leaves in as little as 3 to 4 weeks. Cut off the outer leaves and the plant will grow back. Cut again after a week or two and again and again. A small pot or bowl of reusable mixed lettuce, properly managed, can supply weeks of daily fresh salad greens from a cutting board-sized space. Consecutive planting, seeding a new flat every 2 to 3 weeks, extends this production through the cool season. Stark economics. A packet of leaf lettuce seeds costs $2 and produces more salad greens than you could buy for $50 at the grocery store. From a pot on the balcony in 3 weeks. Lettuce has been relegated to being a simple starter vegetable for novice gardeners, which it is, but it has been underappreciated as a serious food production tool in the process. In urban gardens, container gardens, small space growing situations, nothing beats lettuce for effort-to-yield ratio. This is a plant that proves you don't need acres to grow serious food. Here's a plant that provides a true 2-for-1 deal that most gardeners either don't know about or don't take full advantage of. Beets produce an edible root, sweet, earthy, nutritious, and edible tops that are one of the best culinary green crops in the garden. You don't choose between the root and the tops, you get both. Thin out your beet seedlings and eat the thinnings as microgreens. Harvest outer leaves throughout the season while roots develop. Dig up the roots when ripe and eat them too. The roots store exceptionally well in cool conditions. A bed of beets can provide root vegetables that last in the cellar or refrigerator through the winter, extending your homemade food supply well past the end of the gardening season. Beets also grow quickly, with many varieties producing harvestable roots in 50 to 60 days. Consecutive plantings in the spring and again in late summer for a fall harvest will maximize the season. They tolerate light frosts and actually improve in flavor when hit by frost by converting starches into sugars. Beets have been underrated partly because canned beets have given people the wrong impression of taste. Fresh roasted beets from the garden are a completely different food, sweet, complex, nothing like their canned counterpart. And the tops, sautéed with garlic and olive oil, are outstanding. This is a double harvest plant that rewards gardeners who pay attention to what is actually on offer. Chard is the foundation of a productive kitchen garden for anyone who understands what they can do. Chard is planted continuously from early summer until hard frost, often producing 3 to 5 months of consistent harvesting. As with kale, the multiple harvesting technique works perfectly. Harvest the outer leaves, leave the center, and the plant continues to grow. Unlike kale, chard handles the summer heat better and tends to look great. The colorful stems of rainbow chard transform a productive garden into something that is also truly beautiful. The greens are milder than kale, more versatile, and work in everything from raw salads to stir-fries, soups, and grain bowls. The stems themselves are edible and can be cooked separately. One row of chard can supply a household with greens several times a week throughout the summer and fall. Planting requires minimal space, minimal investment, and almost no maintenance other than harvesting. Chard has been relegated to a secondary vegetable, something you grow if you have extra space, when it should be planted as a primary, dedicated, serious crop in every food garden. Gardeners who treat it as an extra thought leave months of free, nutritious food on the table. It is a plant that asks so little and gives so much that it is almost a shame how often it is overlooked. And here we are in 20th place. One that I saved for last because it may be the most quietly exceptional food plant you can grow. Chives are a perennial. Plant them once, and they come back every year forever, requiring little to no attention at all. It emerges in early spring before most other food plants have stirred and continues to produce through the growing season. Cut it down to 2.5 centimeters above the ground and it will grow back in a week. Cut again and again. The denser you plant it, the more you can harvest. A 30-centimeter bunch of chives, harvested every 10 days, produces an almost continuous supply of fresh onion flavor for kitchen use all season long. Green onions work similarly. Planted thickly in a container or raised bed, green onions can be harvested by cutting off the tops and allowing the base to grow back, the same principle of multiple harvesting that works for lettuce and chard. Or pull up entire plants and replant the regenerated bulbs to keep the cycle going indefinitely. The flavor value of fresh chives and green onions in everyday cooking is disproportionate to the space they occupy. A 10-centimeter pot of chives on the kitchen windowsill, harvested regularly, will provide weeks of fresh herb use. A dedicated bed of 70 square centimeters of green onions, planted thickly and managed for a continuous harvest, can supply a family's onion needs through the growing season from a space smaller than most coffee tables. Chives and green onions were classified as garnish plants, nice to have but not serious food. This is completely false. In terms of value per square centimeter of garden space, they beat almost everything else on this list. It's the harvest that never stops, from a plant that never needs replacing, from a space so small it barely qualifies as a garden. This is a reminder that the most productive plants are not always the largest. They are the ones who continue to give quietly, without asking for anything in return, season after season after season. If this video changed the way you see your garden or made you realize that you don't need an orchard to grow serious food, hit that like button. This really helps this channel reach the people who need this information the most. Leave a comment below and tell me what plant you are adding to your garden this season. Do you go straight to the berry bushes, build a vertical trellis system, or plant that multi-harvest bed you've been putting off for years? I read every comment and truly love hearing what you are growing. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do it now. We post every week about growing more food in less space, spending less, and building food security that doesn't depend on the grocery store 30 yards away.